We need to move these materials to the other side of the site.
Okay, I can take some in my basket now.
Did you see the news this morning? It's quite unsettling, don't you think?
I think the most important thing is that we're all on the same page. We need to discuss the quarterly budget.
I've been feeling a bit overwhelmed lately, like there's too much on my plate.
Anh biết là em rất là lo lắng. Em cũng biết là anh rất là lo lắng cho em mà. We need to move these materials to the other side of the site.
Okay, I can take some in my basket now.
It's funny because I always thought that I would get more nervous around people I didn't know.
Oh, that's a lovely pattern.
Thank you, Samuel.
Thank you, I just got it.
Husband. This is really something to see. Yes, very impressive.
Hello, yes, I'm just sitting in the garden having some tea. What did you think of the book?
I really enjoyed the characters and their development throughout the story.
And today I will show you how to become rich.
The car pulled away, and the dust rose like a curtain falling between them. Hours later, as the plane carried James across the sky, he pulled a folded letter from his pocket. He had left it on Diep's table, knowing she would find it once she returned home. In it, his words bled with sincerity. He told her he was sorry for abandoning her once more. Sorry that duty had dragged him away again. He confessed that between filial piety and love, he chose both. But his family needed him now, and he could not refuse. He promised he would come back soon, that she must wait, no matter how long. He dreamed that their next flight together would not be one of departure, but of celebration, the journey to their honeymoon. He begged her to wait, to believe, and to hold hope close to her chest. Back at home, the old mother sat alone, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the door long after James had gone. She whispered to herself that her son was far away, and she did not know when he would come home. She prayed silently that his work would go smoothly, that fate would guide him safely. Tears slid down her cheeks, though she quickly brushed them away, as if hiding them from the empty room. Outside, the neighbors returned to their lives, but the air remained heavy with the weight of her longing. Diep found the letter, her hands trembling as she unfolded the paper, each word carved into her heart, each promise both comfort and torment. She pressed the letter to her chest, her eyes brimming with tears, and whispered that she would wait, that she would remain strong. She knew that James would face countless difficulties abroad, challenges harsher than those he had ever known in Vietnam. But she believed in him. She promised to herself that she would not waver, that she would be the anchor he could always return to. As night fell, the house seemed emptier than ever. The silence pressed upon Diep like a tide. She sat by the window, gazing out into the darkness, whispering James's name into the wind. Her heart ached, but she remembered his words, that her tears should only fall for happiness. She wiped her cheeks and swore that she would not cry again. that she would carry his strength within her. She must be strong, not only for herself, but for him, for their future. The days began to pass slowly, each hour dragging under the weight of absence. James's mother often sat alone, her thoughts drifting endlessly to her son abroad. Diep, refusing to sink into sorrow, decided she must act. She walked to the construction site where the new house was planned. The manager, Mr. Lin, stood among piles of wood, checking measurements. His brow furrowed as he discovered that several beams had been cut too short. There was nothing she could do, not yet. But he thanked her for her willingness, acknowledging her determination. She nodded, her eyes firm, and told him that whenever he needed, she would return to help. Later that day, Diep remembered the orchard James had purchased, the land where pineapples and grapefruits grew. She climbed the hill alone, her steps steady despite the weight in her heart. She missed the sound of his footsteps, the way he carried strength into the house, the way his voice filled the walls with comfort. Now the silence felt sharp, cutting into her bones. Neighbors came from time to time, bringing words of sympathy, speaking of James with kind voices, but kindness could not mend the ache in her heart. Diep, meanwhile, fought her battles quietly. Each morning she awoke with a tightness in her chest, but she forced herself to rise, to carry out the tasks of the day. She remembered James's words again and again, that her tears should only be shed for happiness, not sorrow, not emptiness. So she held her tears inside, letting them turn into fuel, letting them sharpen her resolve. She worked harder, cleaned the house, cared for his mother, and when the hours dragged too heavily, she would walk to the orchard he had bought, running her hands over the pineapple plants and whispering to the wind as if the leaves could carry her words across the ocean to him. Sometimes, she would stand on the hill as the sun sank, whispering promises that she would wait, that she would not give up. The land felt alive, the soil breathing beneath her feet, and she clung to that life as if it were an extension of him. At the construction site, progress moved slowly. Mr. Lin, the manager, struggled with shortages of wood and delays in labor. His voice carried frustration as he checked measurements and made calls. His eyes narrowed as though he could will the mistakes into corrections. Diep began to visit more often, even if there was little to do. She wanted to help, to carry pieces of the burden, because the house being built was not just walls and beams. It was a dream James had left behind, a promise that needed to be fulfilled. Though Mr. Lin told her many times that there was no work yet, she insisted that she was ready, that she would do whatever was needed. Her persistence seemed to soften him, and one day he allowed her to help carry and sort small pieces of wood, tasks simple but meaningful to her. Every plank she touched felt like she was touching the future James had imagined, every effort a silent vow to him. James's letter remained with her always, folded carefully and tucked into a drawer. But she read it often, her fingers tracing the words as if she could feel his presence in the ink. His apologies tore at her heart. His promises lit sparks of hope in her chest. He had written that their next flight together would be for a honeymoon, a dream so bright it carried her through the darkest nights. She clung to that vision, seeing herself by his side, smiling as they soared through the sky, not in sorrow, but in celebration. Yet, with every day that passed, the waiting became harder, the silence louder, the shadows deeper. One evening, as rain fell against the roof, Diep sat with James's mother. The old woman's eyes were wet, though her voice tried to remain steady. She told Diep that she feared she would not live to see her son return, that the distance felt endless, that the world had stolen him away. Diep took her hand, warm against the frail skin, and whispered that they both must be strong, that James needed them to believe, that he would come back. The rain outside seemed to echo their fear, but inside, their shared strength grew like a quiet flame. The village around them was alive with murmurs. Neighbors spoke often of James, of the sacrifice he made for his family, of the love he left behind. Some pitied Diep, shaking their heads at her devotion, wondering aloud if waiting was wise. But Diep ignored their doubts. She carried James not as a question, but as a certainty. Every word of his letter was carved into her heart, every memory of his smile etched into her soul. She did not need reassurance because her faith was enough. One day, Diep walked again to the orchard. The pineapples were ripening, golden under the sun. She harvested them carefully, each fruit heavy in her hands, each one a reminder of the dreams James had planted. She carried them down the hill, her body weary, but her heart steady. In the village market, she sold them with a quiet pride, knowing the money would contribute to the home they were building, to the life they were creating. Each coin was not just currency, but a symbol of resilience, a step toward the day when James would return. But as night fell that day, a strange unease settled over her. She sat outside under the stars, the air cool against her skin, and felt the distance between herself and James more sharply than ever. The silence pressed harder. The longing burned deeper. She closed her eyes and whispered his name again and again, as if repetition could bridge oceans, as if her voice could travel through the dark to reach him. The wind stirred the trees, carrying her whispers upward, and she imagined him somewhere far away pausing, lifting his head, hearing her voice across the void. James's mother joined her, settling beside her with slow, careful steps. They sat together, two women bound by love for the same man, two women carrying the weight of his absence. The mother sighed deeply, her breath trembling, and said she dreamed of the day her son would walk back through the door. Diep squeezed her hand and promised again that day would come, that hope must never falter. Together they sat until the stars dimmed and the horizon began to pale with dawn. The work at the construction site resumed slowly, the missing wood delivered, the workers finally arriving. Mr. Lin guided them with sharp commands, his voice carrying authority. Diep returned each day, offering her strength. She carried wood, fetched tools, and though her hands blistered and her body ached, she smiled through the pain. She knew this house was more than shelter. It was a monument to patience, to sacrifice, to love. Each nail driven into the beams was a heartbeat. Each wall raised a promise. The house grew taller, and with it grew her determination. Yet inside her, loneliness still coiled like a serpent. At night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, whispering James's name into the silence. She replayed his words again and again, that he would come back, that their next journey together would be for joy. She imagined his face, his voice, his embrace, and held onto those visions like lifelines. Sometimes tears threatened to fall, but she forced them back, remembering her vow. Strength was her gift to him, patience her proof of love. The orchard, the construction site, the small home with his mother, all became threads in the fabric of her waiting. Every act, every effort was tied to him. She was not just surviving the days, she was weaving a future for both of them. Though shadows haunted her and doubts whispered in the corners of her mind, she silenced them with action, with work, with faith. And as another sunset bled across the sky, painting the world in shades of fire and sorrow, Diep stood at the top of the hill, pineapples gathered at her feet, and whispered once more to the wind. She told James she would wait, no matter how long, no matter how hard. Because love was not a fleeting flame, but a fire that could endure oceans and years. The wind seemed to carry her words far into the distance, and she stood tall against the fading light, her heart fierce with hope, her spirit unbroken. The seasons shifted slowly, and with each passing day the house grew taller, the orchard grew fuller, and the silence inside Diep's heart grew heavier, yet steadier, like a weight she had learned not only to carry but to shape into strength. Every sunrise was another chance to work, to keep the promise alive, and every sunset was another reminder of distance, of longing, of a love stretched across oceans but unbroken. She rose before dawn, her hands raw from labor, her body aching from endless tasks, yet her spirit held firm, driven by James's words that still lived in the letter she carried close. Sometimes she would sit by the unfinished doorway of the new house, running her hand over the wood, and imagine James stepping through, smiling, saying her name, filling the emptiness with his presence again. She imagined his mother rushing forward with tears in her eyes, embracing him as though never letting go. Imagined herself at his side, laughing through her own tears, knowing the waiting had finally ended. But until that day came, she worked. She harvested pineapples from the hill James had bought, carrying the fruits down the slope under the scorching sun, sweat running down her face like proof of her resilience. Each fruit, heavy in her arms, felt like a message from him, a reminder that he had planted more than just crops. He had planted a dream, a foundation, something for her to hold on to while he was away. In the village market, she sold the pineapples, her face calm, but her heart whispering his name with every exchange of coin. Neighbors spoke of her strength, some with admiration, some with pity, but she no longer cared what they thought. She was not living for their approval. She was living for James, for his mother, for the future they had promised one another. The nights were the hardest. She would sit beneath the quiet sky, the stars scattered like fragments of broken glass, and whisper into the darkness. Sometimes she prayed that the same stars shone above James wherever he was, that he might look up at the same sky and think of her. The wind would stir the trees, carrying her words, and she would close her eyes and imagine them reaching him. His letter she read again and again, never tiring of the words, never losing faith in the promise that their next flight together would not be a farewell, but a honeymoon. The ink had begun to fade from her constant touch, but the message burned brighter in her soul than ever before. James's mother grew older with the waiting, her hair silvering, her hands shaking, but she too carried the fire of hope. She would sometimes sit with Diep and speak of her son, of his childhood, of the way his laughter filled the house when he was a boy. Her stories were both comfort and pain, reminders of what was lost, but also proof of what was worth waiting for. Together, the two women formed a bond stronger than blood, both anchored to the same absent man, both bound by the same unshakable love. As the house neared completion, with walls rising and a roof finally stretching across the beams, Diep stood inside and felt the echo of life waiting to fill it. The rooms were still empty, the floor still rough, but she could already see the future. A table set for family meals, laughter echoing against the walls, the warmth of love woven into every corner. She touched the wooden frame of a window and whispered James's name again, a promise that one day he would stand here with her, looking out together, knowing that all the waiting had been worth it. The final harvest of the season came, the orchard glowing with golden fruit, and as Diep carried the last basket down the hill, she paused, looking back at the field stretching behind her. The land seemed to breathe, alive with the memory of him, alive with the hope of his return. She whispered once more to the wind, not with desperation but with strength, telling him she would wait no matter the years, no matter the distance, because love was not fragile. Love was not fleeting. Love was eternal when it was built on sacrifice and faith. And so, as dusk painted the sky in fire and shadow, Diep stood tall before the nearly finished house, the pineapples at her feet, the letter close to her heart, and the unwavering belief shining in her eyes. Across oceans, James was far, but in her heart, he was never gone. She would wait, she would endure, and when he returned, their love would not simply begin again. It would rise from the ashes of distance, stronger than time, stronger than sorrow, a flame that had burned through silence and survived.